like our version of New Year's. All right, Madam Chair, we are live and ready to go.
And right on cue. Welcome to the Tuesday, December 14th, 2021 Washington County Board of Commissioners meeting. Clerk Moss, please do us the honors.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. The Washington County Board of Commissioners, also meeting as the Board of Directors of Clean Water Services and all other county service districts, is now meeting this regular session, December 14th, 2021. Commissioner Willie.
Here.
Commissioner Rogers.
Here.
Vice Chair Treese.
Here.
Chair Harrington. I will announce
Here.
that Commissioner Fye is excused for tonight.
Yes, thank you very much, Clerk Moss. I have a few board announcements, changes to the agenda from the original published agenda. Item C14 has been revised. That's on the consent agenda. Additionally, on the consent agenda, C15 has been revised. Under the action section of the agenda, item 1 has been pulled. We hope to have that coming back to us either in January or the first part of February. Item F2 under action has been revised as well. That is all I have for changes to this evening's agenda. Next on our agenda is oral communication. This is an opportunity for anyone in our community to speak with us for up to 2 minutes. Clerk Moss, do we have anyone signed up?
We do, Madam Chair. We have William Pokney. William, can you hear us? You able to unmute, William?
Okay, now I'm unmuted.
Yeah,
Yes, we
go
can hear
ahead.
you.
Okay, my name's William Pokorny. Little difference. Okay, yes. For the 2 minutes. Okay, I wanted to talk about the something that's not on the agenda for the night. It's the proposed gas station installation and construction at the corner of Northeast, no, North 185th Northwest Avenue or Boulevard and West Union Road. I have looked at it a little bit and I understand the history, and I have some concerns basically as a retired civil engineer, how the impact with the increased traffic so close to the intersection at 185th and West Union, it's going to be backed up and everything will be impacted by this gas station with the increased traffic volume. That is, I guess the calculations are that it would increase by about 2,200 cars a day. Also, I don't know if many people are aware of it, but there's a history of underground storage tanks that have been removed within the last 10 years from the site. And there's an extensive report from the consulting firm that wanted everything to be removed. It should be looked at. And also, there should be water, surface water is supposed to be protected within a quarter mile of the site, according to DEQ. And I guess that's about all the time that I have for allotment.
Thank you, William.
Okay.
All right, we have no other members of the public signed up at this time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Clerk Moss. Next, we'll move on to this evening's consent agenda. Tonight's consent agenda consists of 15 items, 1 set of minutes, 1 item under Clean Water Services, 6 items under Health and Human Services, 1 item under Office of Community Development, 1 under County Council, 1 under Housing Services, 1 under the Sheriff's Office and Support Services, one under Land Use and Transportation, one under Just Support Services, and one under Board of Commissioners. What are the wishes of the commission? We have a motion to approve from Commissioner Rogers, a second from Vice Chair Treese. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye or raise your hand. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 4-0. Next, we'll move on to presentations. We have a presentation tonight with regard to shelter program expansion, location guidelines, and community engagement process update. We'll turn it over to Ms. Angie to introduce her team. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Harrington, Board of Commissioners. At this point, I would like to transition to Comey Calabar, who will give a brief overview. And I believe I see Josh Kreitz and Mr. Calabar. Is there anyone else that needs to be promoted?
Yes, Jess Larson, Ty Schofferman, and Janine Smith.
Okay, thank you. So Comey?
Yes. Good evening, Chair Harrington. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Comey Calabar, Housing Director. We are pleased to bring this shelter expansion, location guidelines, and community engagement process update for discussion with you tonight. Because the supportive housing services measure, which was approved by voters, is up and running here in Washington County, we are just excited with all the progress here in our county. We know there's people outside living unsheltered tonight in very cold weather. Gratefully, the shelter program is expanding with SHS funding. These programs are time limited, however. What we are trying to bring in front of you today is to discuss going forward with those same shelter programs. With the help of the housing bond and the turnkey program, we have 3 shelters in this county, and we know Aloha Inn will become permanent housing in the near future. We have a contract and remodel plan for that particular bridge shelter. So tonight, we want to turn our attention to the work ahead, planning for long-term permanent shelter programs that can better serve our community year-round. This will include all kinds of shelter programs, traditional congregate shelter programs, transitional motel rooms, alternate shelter programs like safe parking programs and sleeping pod villages with services. We know we need to create more options for the many different needs people are experiencing in our community. And our goal ultimately is to return people to housing stability. We know this will be challenging work, and we do this work well. We do it and we are guided by equity, best practices, and community input. So the SHS team has prepared a presentation of the program and community engagement work that is planned to support the shelter expansion for our county. So with that, I'll hand you over to Jess Larson and the rest of the SHS team, which is Ty Schofferman and Janine Smith. And Josh should be available for questions.
Thank you, Comey. Thank you, Comey, for that introduction. Good evening, Chair and board members. My name is Jess Larson. I use she and her pronouns, and I am the Supportive Housing Services Program Manager. Next slide, please. So here's a quick overview of our team's presentation for you this evening. First, I will give you a quick overview of our current shelter programs in action in our community across the county, and also the planning work getting ready to expand our shelter capacity with the new Supportive Housing Services Program funds that are going to be available. Then I'm going to pass the baton to Janine, our Housing Justice Coordinator, who will walk you through the development of location location guidelines using equity and best practices in siting shelter programs. These are draft guidelines under development that will be further informed through our community engagement work, which Ty Schwefferman, our supportive housing services community engagement specialist, will walk you through, describing our engagement strategy over the course of the first few months of the new year to work in partnership and full communication with a broad set of stakeholders across our community to provide information about this needed and planned shelter program expansion and get feedback to help inform how we do it and make sure we do it well and in partnership with our community. And then, of course, in closing, before we move any of this work forward, we want to receive your feedback and further direction as we kick off a plan for this work in the new year. Okay, next slide, please. So to ground us all is a reminder of the local implementation plan that you approved back in the spring of 2021 before we ever launched the Supportive Housing Services Program. Here are the 3 fundamental program goals for SHS when we reach full capacity. We won't reach full capacity in the first year. In fact, it often takes several years before a new tax achieves that full capacity, but we're building towards these goals already. And ultimately, those goals include, of course, first and foremost, permanent supportive housing placements, our portion of the regional effort to achieve functional zero chronic homelessness with 1,665 permanent supportive housing placements here in Washington County. And then also a commitment to supporting year-round shelter capacity with an additional 250 beds throughout Washington County. And then also always that all of our program outcomes demonstrate that we are indeed advancing racial equity through those who are served and their outcomes in our program. So these are the 3 guiding goals that really inform all of the work we're always doing in the Supportive Housing Services Program. And tonight we're going to hone in especially on the middle goal, but of course it's always grounded in equity work as well. Next slide, please. So where are we so far? Pardon me. Kind of grounding us in the kinds of shelter that we generally talk about. For us in our program work, we talk about the extent of the services available in these shelter types, not the nature, the model of the shelter type, not the kind of building or the structure of the program, but the extent of services. So right now we have 187 shelter beds open for winter season only. So these are only through the harshest winter months of our year, and they're really focused on life-saving, saving lives through these winter months. And then in the event of severe weather, which we're tracking every day right now, because you're also probably aware of our temperatures that are dipping close to freezing, we have the capacity to pop up additional shelter throughout the extent of a weather event, so like a snowstorm, so that we can ensure a no turn away capacity. So anybody who's seeking shelter can come on inside, have safe and warm place to sleep until the weather event is passed. And then when we think about year-round shelter programs, we're actually thinking about purpose-built programs that are housing focused. The buildings are designed, the programs are designed to provide meals and hygiene supports, case manager services, and ultimately the services that help people focus on their housing plan and goals towards housing placement. And also when you have year-round shelter capacity, you can also tailor your program designs to serve specific populations, like veterans, couples with pets, for example, culturally specific shelter programs. We don't have that capacity in our winter seasons because, again, we're focused on life-saving. So these are some of the reasons why our program, as we're expanding, we're working to specifically expand our year-round shelter capacity because it's fundamentally better service for our community. Next slide, please. So Before the supportive housing services kicked off this summer, this is the slide to give you a sense of the status of our system's capacity previous to supportive housing services. We had 151 year-round shelter beds. Those were primarily to serve about 41 families that could flex up to a total of 146 beds, but depending on how big those families were. And then we had 5 youth shelter beds, and we had 0 year-round beds for single families. That was before the Bridge Shelter Program, before SHS funding. And then in the winter months, we had 150 winter shelter beds. And generally those beds were hosted at various faith communities, churches, and often would move from site to site, from one location to the next on a sometimes nightly basis and sometimes week by week basis. And you'll hear in a minute how we've advanced that system as well for the benefit of the participants of our programs. So this was prior to supportive housing services. Next slide. Now that we have supportive housing services funding up and running, and we had our year-round goals set, which were to achieve 100 new year-round shelter beds, we can kind of enthusiastically report back to you that we have indeed opened 101 year-round shelter beds with SHS funding through those 3 bridge shelter programs you've heard lots about in our programmatic updates, the Loa Inn, the Econo Lodge, and or the Hillsborough Bridge Shelter Program, and the Casa Amparo, the former Forest Grove Inn, that is another turnkey project owned by our partners at Central Cultural. So we've met that first year-round goal, but as Comey was describing, some of those programs are not permanent shelter programs. They will transition. That's the nature of the turnkey model. They'll transition into permanent housing programs. And so we'll need to, again, site and locate that shelter capacity for our community. But so far in year 1, we're on track. And in addition, we made a commitment to maintain at least 150 winter shelter beds. And as you may recall from a couple weeks back, we've indeed launched winter season shelter, and we currently have 187 beds in operation for the winter season. So we've also met that goal. And then the third goal of this year was to make sure we had a year-round severe weather pop-up shelter plan. As you know, severe weather doesn't just happen in the winter anymore. We're experiencing summer events, and we could experience an event at any time. So we're working on creating this year-round response system to pop up that shelter capacity as needed. And so far, we have a plan in place for this winter. Next slide, please. So turning to our plans for the work ahead. Again, as I've described, the work ahead is working towards long-term shelter programs because they improve outcomes for our community participants. You may also recall Dora's story from our presentation earlier this month about the Supportive Housing Services Program update. It was the Bridge Shelter Program that gave her a safe place to sleep and a case manager that connected her to housing. And now she's in stable housing with the supports of that case manager and that rent assistance permanently. So when we have long-term shelter programs, we can design them to meet people where they're at and start working on their housing goals and successfully exit shelter to stable housing placements. So we do that because the buildings and locations are purpose-built. We have housing-focused programming on site with all the additional wraparound services. We specialize the programs to serve specific populations that the programs are designed to serve. And over time, with the stability of a location and a partner providing that service month over month, year over year, the programs get stronger. And we don't have that traction when we're doing shelter programming 4 months a year, essentially. So that these are some of the reasons we're working towards this long-term shelter plan. Next slide, please. When we plan for shelter programs, we also obviously set some parameters, some expectations for the quality of service in these programs. So to help ensure that stability and the outcomes that we desire that are housing focused, we ensured 24-hour staffing on site for the safety of all the partners and participants and surrounding community members, of course, that we have the access to hygiene and food, meals, 3 meals a day, etc. The case managers, wraparound supports. I feel like you're starting to get the themes here. And that all of those guidelines, the services are provided consistent with our SHS overall program guidelines. These will be familiar to you. Things like trauma-informed care practices, culturally specific and culturally responsive services, housing first models, harm reduction models. So when we contract with the service provider, we set all of these expectations through the contract, and then also make sure we're providing that adequate staffing to provide all those services and the safety of the program. And then we measure their outcomes. How are they doing? How long do people stay in the program? And how many people end up in housing? And this is how we build a long-term shelter program through that contractual relationship with our service providers. Next slide. So to make any of this possible, this future work of shelter program expansion for long-term program shelter programming, we need to identify locations. Now, speaking just briefly about the types of shelter programs, we've spent a lot of time talking about bridge shelters, wind shear shelters. There's also been much discussion about alternative shelter types, safe parking villages, tiny pod villages, opportunities for people to find a safe place to sleep that is different than a congregate shelter, because sometimes that's not the kind of service someone would be inclined to seek for shelter. For the purposes of our discussion tonight and in our ongoing work, SHS considers all of these program types or shelter program types necessary and good, as long as they are providing all of those wraparound services, that safety, that staffing, access to those basic amenities for the participants. We need all shelter types in our system here in Washington County to meet our community's needs for emergency shelter. And to be able to launch any of these new programs and expand our shelter capacity in Washington County, what we need is also to identify locations. And as you know, this is hard work. And so we have a good plan in place to get this hard work started, because it's not only hard citing shelters, it's also hard talking to the community about unsheltered homelessness. I think our community is concerned about both. So we want to have conversations about both and start to create agreements and clarity, and hopefully build some understanding and support for this expanded shelter work we need to do to meet the needs of our community members. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, first Janine Smith, our Housing Justice Coordinator, who will describe our work, how we're grounding this work in leading with race.
Thank you, Jess. Good evening, Commissioner Harrington, commissioners. I am excited to be here tonight in this new role. For the record, I am Janine Smith, Housing Justice Coordinator for Supportive Housing Services and the Office of Equity and Inclusion and Community Engagement. Supportive Housing Services has made a conscious effort to center and advance equity in its shelter program expansion, location guidelines, and community engagement process. While diving into the research of this body of work, data shows us that Black, Indigenous, Latine, Asian, Pacific Islander, immigrant, and refugee communities have been historically impacted and burdened with housing instability and discrimination. There have been many discussions, and SHS acknowledges disparities and has made a commitment to understanding equitable approaches in locating shelter programs. While doing a crosswalk of research on local, state, and national homeless shelter guidance, there were several equity considerations that spoke to best practices in creating shelter program guidelines. Next slide, please. This next slide focuses on best practices in equity and location of shelter programs. The research showed us that access to frequent and reliable transportation, more specifically public transportation, allows people experiencing homelessness to access services, have their basic needs met, and sustainably transition back into the community. Another guiding principle when considering shelter program locations is the proximity to services, employment, and community resources, which allows shelter participants to receive and access a network of providers for additional support. Studies find programs that are in proximity to mental health, medical services, food banks, and other resources allows participants to achieve and maintain housing stability and to maintain a sense of normalcy. A highly valued equity consideration within these principles include geographic and demographic distribution. Low income or culturally specific neighborhoods tend to be extremely vulnerable to economic and social stress, and therefore caution should be made to ensure shelter programs are not concentrated or solely located in low income or culturally specific neighborhoods, as this would cause an undue burden. This includes caution to proximity of sensitive public spaces, such as schools, playgrounds, and other community spaces. Next slide, please. The next slide highlights equity considerations in program management. Best practice is working with experienced service providers with staffing capacities to accommodate the needs of shelter participants, and to also assist the surrounding community through training and management support to ensure equitable outcomes. Equity considerations in management also ensures community and participant safety by utilizing proactive and person-centered security services would help negate negative stereotypes about people experiencing homelessness and caution around over-policing of low-income people and communities of color. One of said stereotypes is that people experiencing homelessness cause spillover of debris. Cleanliness can be managed through supportive community livability programs and can resolve those concerns. It also can potentially provide employment opportunities to people experiencing homelessness. Next slide. Our last slide frames 3 principles for equity consideration in community engagement, which is to have transparent and accountable communication with the public, the community, local, and surrounding shelter programs. Honest and transparent communication creates a platform for community feedback sessions to help gauge and understand the needs and concerns of the surrounding neighborhoods. Research also shows the importance of utilizing mapping tools to help identify neighborhood demographics with large considerations such as languages spoken within homes. Special religious practices and household income status are determinants of good shelter program locations. Lastly, developing a community agreement process can uplift community concerns and identify solutions that are agreed to by all parties, including neighbors, program operators, and building and business owners, which leads us to our community engagement plan, which I will turn it over to Ty to expand on.
Thank you so much, Janine, and counselors. For the record, my name is Ty Schweffer. I'm Program Coordinator with the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement and Supportive Housing Services. So we've developed for you, staff have developed a broad-based strategy for community engagement we'd like to present to you tonight. And also, again, we're open for feedback and welcome that. So over the coming months, during the winter, we'd like to engage the community in discussions about expanding our shelter program. And this engagement series will hope to inform our work in the coming years. The shelter program series will be conducted over the winter. We'd like to invite folks to virtual meetings, as well as some hybrid engagement in addition to surveys that would go out to the community, and I'll get into those strategies a little bit more later. Part of our work and what we want to do with this engagement is gain feedback on the guidelines for shelter location policies. And we've already heard a lot about our equity considerations. We would like to hear about all aspects of our shelter locations. Community agreements as well should be a part of our engagement. We would like to get feedback and build towards those opportunities, as well as hearing and getting more contributions for the development of a community-informed shelter guidelines document, which would be produced at the end of our engagement series. We can go to the next slide. These are some of the partners. As I mentioned, we like this to be very broad-based. The supportive housing services, along with the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement, and our partner city jurisdictions, as well as shelter program operators, would engage in this planning of our series. Our goals are to build community trust, to ensure a more responsiveness to the community's needs as we expand our program. So as you can see, we've listed here some of these city jurisdictions, City of Hillsborough, City of Beaverton, and more. These are just kind of our early partners that we know we want to engage, but we also will be welcoming and expanding our outreach to more of our city jurisdictions. Shelter providers, that includes folks like participants in our HISN network and others, shelter operators that may be recruited in the future for future RFP opportunities to operate these shelters. Community, as we heard a little bit from Janine on demographics, we do also want to highlight some important stakeholders in this work. Neighborhood residents and business owners, faith-based communities, people with lived experience, and service providers. I think there's been a lot of great work done with ANED and others in the Department of Housing to engage folks with lived life experience, being homeless or other experiences. We've been doing a great effort of that, and now we want to continue that engagement in this process as well. Black, Indigenous, Latine, Asian, Pacific Islanders, and immigrant and refugee communities as well. Next slide, please. So our engagement strategies are including public meetings, virtual, and of course, we're going to continue to assess our readiness for hybrid meetings. And that might be kind of a call with some of our jurisdiction partners as well. But we'd really like to host meetings. And much of the shelter work, as part of our learnings is, it's really place-based. So we'd like to target 3 different regions of Washington County, including the Western region, the Central region, and the Eastern region, and host a meeting for each of those regions. So we'll really be more focused, more intentional in targeting those regions, including the community partners and neighborhood residents, communities of color, and others that are in those localities. We'd like to also conduct some direct interviews. We heard from some of our community partners, shelter operators, and they'd like to see us. So we're going to set up a series of engagements where we'll show up, maybe get folks some tea and donuts and whatnot, and just ask some basic questions about shelter locations, and which will be a part of a standard survey that will both be conducted in person and also distributed virtually. And that will lead us to the kind of end of our timeline in March. We'd like to work towards the development and a draft shelter program guidelines. And along the way, we really are going to do our best to incorporate as much of the feedback that we heard along the way. Thank you. And now I would like to turn it back over to Comey for our last remaining slide. Thank you.
Good evening again, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. Does the board have questions for us or further direction based on the presentation? We are specifically looking for equity and best practices, your insights on those, planning for shelter, program expansion, and obviously the community engagement plan that Ty outlined so brilliantly for us.
Commissioners, questions, comments, direction? Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Yeah, thanks, Comey, and your team for putting this together. This is a great presentation. I was just looking at your engagement strategies that's on, the next to the last slide there, and the timing of that. I'm hopeful that that you will reach out to the commissioners that are going to be there's their districts, and that you'll involve us in at least the timing of that, where it's going to be, so that we can get it on our calendars in advance and make sure we attend those, so we can hear the community feedback as well. So that's my request of you and your team.
We certainly can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Other commissioners? Nothing from Commissioner Trees, nothing from Commissioner Rogers. Okay, thank you. I have two items. First is along the lines of what Commissioner Willie was asking about. I've been pleased thus far with the recommendations that I've received during the course of my 3 years as a commissioner to please be at certain events or other events, to step back from that, to ensure that there's room. I don't mean physically for everyone, but that the room provides enough space for community members who might not otherwise engage with elected officials in the room, to allow that space to be as welcoming as possible. And I have to say, participating on the Metro Supportive Housing Services Oversight Committee and the series of 3 retreats, I've learned a lot about decentering whiteness and ensuring much more welcoming spaces. So at this juncture, looking at the work plan table, I want you to know that I'm very much looking forward to your recommendation. You can either share it tonight or let me know soon, as I've got a lot of calendar holds on my calendar of which, if any of those line items, you're particularly inviting members of the commission or hoping to have presence or not. I'm inviting that input across the board. So I'll just leave that invitation there for you to follow up on, should you wish. And my second item, I just want to say, let me say this without a negative. I am so very proud of the work of the housing services and community engagement teams, particularly in all things housing and homelessness. That includes the community development team too, right? I know it spans multiple departments.
Yeah, and health and human services as well.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Comey. I am just so proud of the thoughtful and compassionate, more importantly, let's not forget, lawful programs that you have put together, along with a whole variety of engagements, all focused on serving the various needs that we have throughout our community. I'm just so very proud of you. I'm grateful. And onward ho we go on this journey. And I hope that you, like all of our 2,100 employees at Washington County and our 300 or so, or more actually, employees at Clean Water Services, get a nice break at some point during these December holidays, because you've done phenomenal work and I am just grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you, team.
I think that's it for direction from the 4 board members tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, that takes care of our presentations this evening. Next, we'll be moving on to boards and commissions, and we have several appointments to go through tonight, but we are first going to start with an announcement of vacancies on various county boards and commissions. So due to vacancies, we are authorizing the recruitment of applicants through almost the end of January, or until all vacancies are filled, for the following: Aging and Veteran Services Advisory Council, the Audit Committee, the Behavioral Health Council, the Civil Service Commission, the Columbia Pacific Economic Development District, also known as COLPAC, the Developmental Disabilities Council, the Enhanced Sheriff Patrol District, combined with the Urban Road Maintenance District Budget Committee, the Fair Board, the Fairgrounds Advisory Committee, the Farm Board of Review, the Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee, the Housing Advisory Committee, the Metzger Park Local Improvement District Advisory Board, the North Bethany Community Service District for Roads Budget Committee, the Northwest Area Commission on Transportation, also known as Northwest Act, Park and Recreation Advisory Board, Planning Commission, the Rainbow Lane Special Road District Board, the Rural Road Operations and Maintenance Advisory Committee, also known as ROMAC, the Urban Road, did I just say rural? Hopefully at the beginning of that long string, because this next one is the Urban Road Maintenance District Advisory Committee, also known as URMDAC. And lastly, the Washington County and Service District for Lighting #1 Budget Committee. You can find all of this and more on the Washington County website, co.washington.or.us. Over on the left-hand menu, just pick boards and advisory commissions. And we've got a whole suite of information for you to look there. I think that was it for that announcement of vacancies. Next, we will move on to E2, which is the first of 4 sets of items to appoint members to such boards. So this evening, we're going to start by appointing members to the Aging and Veteran Services Advisory Council. We have a proposal to appoint Robert Dalton, Gail Green, and Karen Salter as new members to the Aging and Veteran Services Advisory Council, each with terms ending June 30th, 2024. What are the wishes of the commission? We have a motion from Commissioner Vice Chair Trees, a second from Commissioner Willie. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye or raise your hand. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 4-0. Next, we'll move on to the, whoops, skipped one. Here we go. The planning commissioners for District 1 and District 4 to the Planning Commission. We're going to reappoint Rachel E. Maury-Bedeau to Planning Commission position for District 1 for a 4-year term expiring January 31, 2026, and also appoint Morgan Will to the Planning Commission position representing District 4 for a partial term expiring January 31, 2022, and then to a subsequent 4-year term expiring January 31st, 2026. What are the wishes of the commission regarding these? We have a motion from Commissioner Willie, a second from Vice Chair Treese. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye or raise your hand. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 4-0. Next, we're moving on to reappoint citizen at large members and affirm city representatives to the Northwest Area Commission on Transportation. And here we'll be approving the appointment of Mike Borison to the Washington County Citizen at Large position and affirm Bank City Councilor Marcia Kirk as a city voting member and the Bank City Manager Jolynn Becker as the alternate city representative to the Northwest Area Commission on Transportation, also known as Northwest Act. We have a motion from Commissioner Rogers. We have a second from Commissioner Willie. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand. Thank you, commissioners. Anyone opposed? The motion carries unanimously 4-0. Lastly, for this whole set, we have a proposal to appoint members to the Public Safety Coordinating Council. So the Public Safety Coordinating Council respectfully requests that we appoint Jenny Gilmore Robinson to the position of representative from a victim serving agency, and that we appoint Melissa Laird and Gary Dozier to the lay committee member positions, all with terms beginning January 1, 2022 through December 31, 2023. What are the wishes of the commission? We have a motion from Commissioner Willie, a second from Vice Chair Treese. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 4-0. Next, we'll move on to the action items. As mentioned earlier, item 1's been pulled, so we'll move on to item 2, which is to adopt the 2022 Washington County and Clean Water Services federal and state legislative agendas. And at this juncture, I'd like to turn it over to our great members doing this government relations work. We have Mark Jockers from Clean Water Services, Aaron Doyle, Government Relations Manager, Paige Spence, Government Relations Manager, both with Clean Water Services, and Tracy Rainey, who may be a new face to members of our viewing audience. She joined us as a senior policy analyst for Clean Water Services after having been in the whole water domain with the League of Oregon Cities. So welcome, Tracy, and I'll turn it over to our team.
Thank you, and good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. I am Erin Doyle, one of your great government relations managers for the Washington County. Your county and Clean Water Services teams are here to review the proposed agendas that are proposed for adoption this evening, and we will work to keep this as brief as possible. Next slide, please. This evening, we'll focus first on the federal agenda for both the county and Clean Water Services, and then we will turn to the state agenda under consideration for both agencies. In the packet, you can see the full documents that we will use in our efforts with our state and federal partners to share your agenda. But first, I want to extend my thanks to Sherry Gerald for her responsive support in creating these agenda documents, as well as Philip Bransford for his help in parsing the county's census data. And then I also want to thank Ken Rencher from your LUT department for his assistance in pulling together the data related to the economics of Washington County that is included in the federal agenda. Without teammates like these, we literally cannot tell the story of the county and Clean Water Services effectively. As a reminder, these documents reflect both the county and Clean Water Services agendas, which include guiding principles as well as priorities for the upcoming year. Priorities are the top outcomes that your government relation teams will seek for the coming legislative sessions, and principles will assist the lobby team and staff as we review legislative concepts and bills that are outside of the priorities, but still have impact to the county and to Clean Water Services and to the community. So First up, I'm going to turn to Paige to discuss the county's federal agenda and ask the next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin, and good evening, Chair Harrington, Board of Commissioners, and colleagues. I want to just briefly cover, as you recall, the federal agenda for both Washington County and for Clean Water Services. We presented these agendas to you, the federal and the state agendas in detail last Tuesday, December 7th at your work session, and we are excited to have the final documents prepared and before you tonight for the hopeful formal adoption. So without further ado, next slide, please, and I will just cover a couple of the changes that we have made from last year's federal agenda. As a reminder, as you see on the first bullet on this slide here, our federal agenda for the county is just a comprehensive set of guiding principles, and it does not include specific legislative agenda items like the state agenda does, in order to allow us to be as flexible and nimble as possible with the ever-changing dynamics and issues that are currently before Congress. And so as a quick reminder, we did update a few of the principles for this year. They are on your screen, and they are around healthcare, around housing and homelessness, around transportation, and around bonding. And with those straightforward updates that we discussed with you last week, I think we could advance to the next slide, please. And I will turn it over to Tracy to discuss Clean Water Services federal agenda.
Great, thank you, Paige, and good evening, Chair Harrington, and good evening to the Board of Directors for Clean Water Services. I'm Tracy Rainey, Senior Policy Analyst for Clean Water Services, and I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you this evening to answer any questions or provide any additional detail on Clean Water Services proposed legislative agenda items for 2022. The proposed federal legislative agenda items that are outlined in this slide have not changed since I presented them to the board last week. Our key focus for our proposed federal legislative agenda is to advocate for additional federal investment in water where there are opportunities or unmet needs, but to also work specifically to advocate for water-related funding opportunities that may be available to us and that can be beneficial within our region. This would include working with our partners on critical water-related investment opportunities, including for Scoggins Dam, and making sure that we are thinking strategically about how to position ourselves to be competitive for some of the significant funding opportunities that are coming out of the recently passed Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021. So unless there are any questions that the board has or any items that the board would like some additional detail on, I will pass it back over to Erin Doyle.
Thank you, Tracy. Next, we're going to turn to the state agenda. As you can see, we're meeting our obligation of being quick. As a reminder and kind of context setting, at the state level, the 2020 session is a so-called short session, which lasts only 5 weeks and will begin on February 1st. The state's budget may be slightly adjusted during a short session, but it was set in the last session. And new policies or legislation can be adopted during short session. So our agenda reflects this level of scope of work that is intended for a 5-week session and what we can truly expect to accomplish in that time frame. So next slide, please. Listed here are the 3 high-level priorities that the county has discussed with your board both last week and in November as we moved forward and looking to what we could try to accomplish in 2022. These bullet points reflect just the top line, but there are supporting statements and further details in the agenda documents themselves. You will see that under the supporting points in the economic development page of the state agenda that we did seek to clarify that final point as discussed last week. And it now states that maintaining local flexibility for use of these revenues allows the county to determine the best way of meeting ongoing and emerging needs of the community. I believe that provides the clarity that the board asked for in how we modified that bullet point. These priorities reflect the top needs for the county to support our community as we continue to address the long-term efforts and response and recovery around COVID-19. As well as working to secure sufficient resources so that we can provide the services this board provides to the county. As we have discussed with you, we will focus our energies on these outcomes, but also to continue to work to address other legislative concepts that leaning on the principles you will adopt this evening and conversations with the board during the session. And with that, I will turn it back to Tracy to discuss the Clean Water Services state agenda. Thank you, and next slide.
Great. Thank you, Erin. This slide outlines Clean Water Services state legislative agenda items for 2022. Similar to our federal legislative agenda items, none of these items have changed since we presented to the board last week. As noted previously, we are not going to be introducing any legislation proactively for the 2022 legislative session. So the items that are before you today are items that we anticipate will be before the legislature during the upcoming session, or that will be discussed during the interim immediately following the legislative session. And so with that, being very brief, but I thank you again for the opportunity to present this evening. I'm happy to provide any additional detail on any of these proposed state legislative agenda items. And so I think with that, I will turn it back over to the chair to facilitate any additional discussion or questions that the board may have.
Thank you, team. We have been able to breeze through your presentation tonight because of all the prior work that you've done, both with us individually as well as with all of us together as one Board of Commissioners and Board of Directors for Clean Water Services. So we're leveraging your investment of input. Thank you very much. For members of our community who are looking for a more in-depth explanation, do please feel free to watch the video from our December 7th work session. So, commissioners, we now have these agendas for the federal and state legislature. What are the wishes of the commission regarding the adoption? We have a motion from Vice Chair Treese, a second from Commissioner Rogers. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye or raise your hand. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 4-0. Well, go forth and do wonderful work, both with our congressional delegation, the federal agencies, and our state legislature in this next year of 2022. And stay healthy, please.
Thank you all.
Thank you, team. All right, the next item on our agenda is our second oral communication timeframe. This is an opportunity for members of our community to come and speak with us for up to 5 minutes an individual. Clerk Moss, do we have anyone who wishes to engage with us this evening?
Madam Chair, we have no one signed up, and I don't see anyone on our attendees list wishing to testify tonight.
All right, thank you, Clerk Moss. Next, we have board announcements. I just have one. I want to make sure that members of our greater Washington County community are aware that our local government partner, Metro, have opened a new nature park here in Washington County, Chehalem Ridge. That property was purchased by Metro in the latter part of 2007. And thanks to both a bond measure as well as a levy that the voters also approved, the Chehalem Ridge Nature Park has been opened as of this week. So you can learn more about it via OregonMetro.gov. It is located on Southwest Dixon Mill Road, just south of both Cornelius and Hillsborough. There are some great videos available on the Metro website as well as via social media, including one from Cheryl Kennedy, the chairwoman of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, which speaks rather well to the various natural elements and species of the over 1,200 acres up there and the significance to their community. So we are really blessed to have such a resource in voter protection and available to our community members. I have seen how firsthand how the Metro Cooper Mountain Nature Park has been very well loved during the course of this pandemic. So I encourage our community members to expand their horizons. This park has trails easily accessible for people of all abilities, 3 miles, as well as equestrian trails and mountain biking. So I hope folks will check it out. Beyond that, the other announcements that I have are for our future meetings. We will not be having normal board meetings on Tuesday, December 21st or Tuesday, December 28th. Our next board meetings on the calendar currently are Tuesday, January 4th, work session at 8:30, Housing Authority Board of Directors meeting starting at 10. That's the monthly meeting, with our Board of County Commissioners starting soon after that, generally around 10:30. We'll have a roundtable on Thursday, January 6th, work session jam-packed on Tuesday, January 11th, a pair of meetings on Tuesday, January 18th, and again on January 25th. You can find the immediate times on the board's website, co.washington.or.us. Are there any other board announcements for this time? Seeing none, do we have a motion to adjourn this last Board of County Commissioners business meeting? We have a motion from Commissioner Rogers, a second from Commissioner Willie. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand. Thank you, commissioners. Anyone opposed? Well, there we go. That's it for the last Board of Commissioners regular business meeting for the year of 2021. Stay healthy, everybody. See you next year.
Take care, commissioners.
You too, Kevin.